When I was just a little boy, there were only three things that I loved more than eating bugs. Since I've been able to walk, I've been endlessly enamored by Spider-Man, dinosaurs, and Godzilla, which around now I find to be a little bit strange. There wasn't really much Godzilla content for me to get my grubby little fingers on. See, my family didn't really consume much Eastern media. If you know much about Godzilla, however, you know that the property is quite old and extensive. So, with Godzilla -1 on the way, as well as the 70th anniversary of Godzilla on November 3rd, I decided to watch hell yeah. Alright, so the first imagery we're introduced to is a boat. Some sailors are going along, and the water beneath them starts to glow and bubble, and the boat bursts into flames. A ship gets dispatched to find the missing ship, and the same thing happens to them. There's this cute little edit showing a bunch of newspapers detailing piling reports of missing ships. Then we change scenes to a little fishing village. And everyone's stressed because they aren't bringing in any fish. So this old guy, he's all like, yeah, so this legend I heard growing up says that Godzilla's eating all of our fish, and will come for us soon. We used to sacrifice a young girl when fishing was dry for too long, and he just kind of leaves that there. Later that night, there's a family sleeping in their home during a really bad storm. And look, I'm no expert on storms in Japan, but the house starts like crumbling, is shaking, and no one has any reaction but the young boy who starts running out of the house. And the nonchalant older family members try to stop him. After he runs out, the house collapses on them. The scene is punctuated by a totally busted helicopter, which is very evidently just a toy paired with some forced perspective. Now we finally meet one of our main characters, Professor Yamane, a paleontologist, at a hearing or lecture of some sort. Just an editor's note, I'd like to add that this is absolutely a court hearing. Disregard what I just said. He's talking about the famous Himalayan Yeti prints, and he uses them as leverage to find out if the strange occurrences are tied to an unknown creature. It must have worked, because a big ship with the professor seems to be headed on an expedition. His daughter is waving at the coldest motherfucker I've seen in my entire life. The expedition lands at the coastal town we were at just a moment ago, and they're investigating a massive footprint that is highly radioactive. You heard me correctly. Highly radioactive. I don't know if anybody told these people who are just wearing no protective gear. An alarm sounds, and so the team heads to higher ground, and Yamane babbles about how Godzilla is actually a dinosaur from the Jurassic period, and is, I shit you not, called Godzillasaurus. And from over the hill in all its glory, Godzilla appears. The sequence is a little bit goofy to me and perhaps a little bit dated, but I cannot knock the sound design for the roar. It is still really good. It genuinely relays this foreign level of natural power, the likes of which the characters have never seen. We go back to a lecture of some sort by Professor Yamane, and I'm so sorry. No, I'm not. But I've got a science here real quick. The dinosaurs depicted on screen have dragging tails. It's like a little time capsule based on our understanding of dinosaurs and other ancient animals and how their bodies operated. We believe that all ancient reptiles must have had tails that dragged, because contemporary reptiles, especially large ones, have dragging tails, like monitors and crocodilians. Next up on Science Time is the size of Godzilla. This guy says it's 50 meters, or about 165 feet tall, and based on this Godzilla trivia site, weighs 20,000 metric tons, or 44.09 million pounds if you use Yankee units. Considering they rationalize Godzilla, or Godzillasaurus, as a fucking dinosaur, let's take that into account compared to our current knowledge of ancient animals. In modern day, it's generally accepted that the blue whale, Balænoptera musculus, is the largest creature to have ever lived. The largest blue whale ever weighed was just shy of 200 tons. But, very recently, some big, dense bones were discovered in the Ica Valley in Peru. It's a largely incomplete skeleton, but by reconstructing based on morphology of its relatives, we find ourselves at this. The whale that has changed the way we view whale evolution, and what may dethrone the blue whale as the largest. Meet Parasitus colossus, or literally the colossal whale from Peru. The current estimate for weight leads us to believe it may have topped out around 340 tons. All this to say, even ignoring margin of error, Godzillasaurus is supposedly
5,882% larger.
Whew, sorry about that. You guys ever see the Vsauce video about how Godzilla would crush itself? Yeah, this really put that into perspective for me. Anywho, back to the movie that wants to science some more. Oopsies. The appearance of Godzillasaurus is attributed to American nuclear weapons testing. They come to this conclusion because the sites Godzilla attacked had a strong presence of strontium-90. And I'd like to applaud the people who sourced that information, because it would make sense. See, there are still traces of this isotope in our atmosphere as a result of atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons. Next up is just a little train sequence. There are these two men teasing this woman, and one says that she's going to be eaten by Godzilla, and she says she barely escaped the bomb in Nagasaki. It's kind of sad. Everyone decides that Godzilla needs to die, so they start bombing the ocean where the ship attacks occurred. Yamane sits in a dark room, overwhelmed with sorrow that they'll be losing such a valuable specimen. Godzilla emerges from the depths by this cruise ship, and I'm pretty sure the woman on the ship who points and screams is the Nagasaki woman. A little moment of dark, twisted comedy, perhaps? I don't know. Even if it isn't her, this is my headcanon. Since Godzilla's not dead, someone asks Yamane if Godzilla can be killed, and he says no, which I would criticize if he didn't drop such a good line afterward. Remember that Majima-looking fucker from earlier? See, he's actually a real character, and he's a scientist named Serizawa. He's researching something top secret, and he shows it to Yamane's daughter, but it makes her really upset. Godzilla has begun to encroach upon higher populated territories, and is met with militaristic force, like these high-caliber automatic weapons. I don't really know guns, but if you do, let me know in the comments. I failed to mention it earlier, but when they were making this movie, they got help from the Coast Guard, and it kinda goes crazy. Alas, these weapons do nothing. Godzilla continues until a train hits the ankle, which I have to imagine feels similar to a razor scooter to the shin. Out of anger, Godzilla eats the train and then fucks up a bridge. Honestly, me too, dude. Plot beats are shown through newspapers again, and the situation is becoming of international interest. The military decides to try to electrocute Godzilla with the power grid, and this theme starts playing. Had to mention it because it's so good, but it's worth mentioning that this track is highly associated with Godzilla, pop culturally, but it wasn't actually designed to represent Godzilla. It was originally called Pursue, or Intercept, Godzilla, and it was designed to represent mobilization of the military against the beast. The theme representing Godzilla's destruction was intended to be Fury of Godzilla, which plays during both of the beast's Tokyo escapades. Over time, these tracks would eventually conjoin, with some other pieces as well, to create Godzilla's theme in 1991 for Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. Now, despite having all the time I spent talking to prepare, the military still fails to incapacitate Godzilla. Back at the Yamane residence, Yamane has this weird-ass edit, or cut, during her conversation with her fiancé. I'm not really sure why it happened, but it's really noticeable. I had to rewatch it a few times. But she's going to inform her father about her now having a fiancé. Instead, she finds the professor wallowing because depression and science go hand in hand, baby. Now, the comparison to the atomic bomb is made incredibly direct here, and I found this to be a little bit disappointing, as I don't think it required an explanation, but it's fine. It's fine! Godzilla walks into the power grid and begins taking shots from defensive forces, but as you may have guessed, it is ineffective. Still makes Godzilla angry enough to use the breath weapon for the very first time. And I gotta say, it's pretty cool for the time, as it breathes out this steam that ignites everything it touches. Which would have continued to be badass if not for this little shot of Godzilla's goofy eyes. The defense forces have tanks now, but it still does nothing, except transition into this rad shot of Godzilla's head in the distance over the flaming city that is so hard it makes me want to ask if I can screenshot. Transitioning from such a monolithic sequence, we're brought to a much smaller, more personal one. And this movie balances these pretty decently, but it happens much more in the latter half of the movie, as this woman in a practical war zone is reassuring her children that they'll see their daddy again soon. I felt like mentioning it because it's effective. Way more effective than this reused clip of a crumbling building. In some ways, this movie has its own little darkly comedic moments, and I think this is an excellent example, as the news team risks their lives for coverage of Godzilla, and the presenter live commentates his demise. More war machines show up and they fire missiles at Godzilla as it leaves. Focus has shifted from that moment of satire to people who survived the attack, and it's things like this sequence that really help outline the historical horrors that inspired this film. The displaced people in this emergency care camp are believable, and the scene is genuinely heartbreaking. The scope of the film, purposely displaying the effects of a kaiju attack on large groups of people, is part of what allows this film to still hold up. As we go back to people that hinder the story, Yamane tells her fiancé about the research that Serizawa showed her, and through a flashback we're shown that the fish were stripped of their flesh with something Serizawa called an oxygen destroyer. If you watched Minecraft mod showcases back in the day like I did, you might have heard of it. This is the only time in the entire series of Toho movies that the oxygen destroyer is a direct player in the story. See, Serizawa was trying to invent a technology that would benefit humanity, but accidentally created a weapon of mass destruction. Sound familiar? In the telling of the story, Yamane's fiancé notices the potency of this weapon, so they go pay Serizawa a visit. They try to talk him into using it to kill Godzilla, and he refuses. He finds himself in the midst of an ethical issue, in which he believes that politicians around the world would be fighting over this oxygen destroyer to use as a weapon. Yamane's fiancé and Serizawa start fighting, and then we're shown the fallout of the attacks, and survivors singing over the footage. I didn't really have much to write about this. It was a lot of feeling on my end, so I think I'll just show it to you. The purpose of this sequence is to show a moral appeal in the mind of Serizawa, and so we cut back to him as he burns his notes. He says he'll use the destroyer just once, but it will never again see the light of day, as he sees that Japan needs this. Once again, everyone is here, and they're taking a boat to where they believe Godzilla is. Serizawa says he needs a diving suit because it needs to be activated underwater to reach full effectiveness. The fiancé says he has to go too, and so they do. Somber, ceremonious music lingers as the men prepare the weapon on the seafloor. They start to be pulled back up to the ship, and Serizawa cuts his line and watches as Godzilla gets oxygen destroyed. I didn't mention it earlier, but Serizawa believed that his mind was just as valuable as the notes for the weapon, so here he decides to destroy his mind as well. One of the shots of Godzilla sinking reminds me of what happens to Bruce at the end of Jaws, and I just kind of felt like mentioning that. I can't really find a source on if there was inspiration here, but I digress. We return to the surface and the professor is butthurt as hell, but decides that if nuclear testing continues, perhaps another Godzillasaurus will appear again someday, somewhere, like maybe in the same country 1 year later. But I'm getting ahead of myself. While Godzilla was very evidently a dark and depressing political message, it's one that stood the test of time. Generally, people who have heard of Godzilla understand that it represents the horrors of nuclear weapons. While there are moments of the film that are certainly goofy, and the romance between Yamane and her fiancé really feels pointless, the sound design, costume design, and score are iconic. This movie is more than worth watching, especially with Godzilla Minus One on the way, which takes place around the same time as this film, and apparently even shares some similar shots. If you made it this far and for some reason enjoyed this video, feel free to interact in whatever way you'd like, I guess. I have other projects I'm planning and working on, but I could also continue watching and reviewing these movies if people are interested or if this video even gets any traction. Thanks for watching.